Hopefully you didn't break the bank on Valentine's Day. Are you still on a chocolate high, or did you get any cards from secret admirers? Well, how about some fun facts about where the Valentine's Day card came from? I bet you didn't know it started right here in the state of Massachusetts.
So the woman we're talking about today is Esther Howland. She was class of 1847 at Mount Holyoke, which was then the Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, before it was Mount Holyoke College. She received a Valentine from England a few years after her graduation, and it was a very fancy Valentine with lace and that sort of thing on it, and she was inspired by it. Her father in Worcester owned a bookstore and a stationery store, so she was able to get supplies, and she was able to start making some Valentines for sale.
And it's funny because around the time that this all started getting going, the president of Mount Holyoke College at the time kind of put out a warning saying this, this is a little frivolous, this is getting a little out of hand. Talk about that.
Sure. So Mary Lyons, who was the founder of the Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, she was not a big fan of Valentine's Day or exchanging Valentines. She probably thought it was a bit frivolous and not the best thing for these young women, young students to be spending their time on. But we do have letters in which they mention sharing and sending Valentines. So there must have been a little bit of it going on behind her back.
So show us some of the examples that Esther created, and we'll get into talking more about how her business grew. I mean, by astounding numbers, you can't even believe it. But let's talk about the quality of her cards. Very intricate, I've noticed, the ones that you brought.
They're really beautiful cards. So the three here in the front, these are 3 Esther Howland cards that are part of the collection at Mount Holyoke College's archives. And you can see that they're very ornate Valentines with a lot of handwork done on them, little pieces attached very carefully, and lots of very careful paper and lace cutting. And it's also said that she was the originator of the message inside a card. So when you open these up, you'll see a little message inside the card. And before that, Valentine's cards had messages on the outside, but not necessarily on the inside. So each of these can open it up, and there's a little sweet greeting on the inside of the card.
And I love this last card here. It has a special effect to it, and I'm afraid to do it, so I'm going to have you do it, but it's almost like a little beehive.
Right, so we call this the beehive card because when you pull on the little string here, it pops up almost like a beehive shape, and underneath there's a little cupid hiding there with a ribbon and some flowers, so it's very sweet. And on one of these cards, oh, here it is on this one, you'll see that there's an H printed on the back. They're stamped on the back. I don't know if they all have it or just that particular one. Okay. This one has the H on the back for her company, for Edith Howland.
So this idea that she had grew by leaps and bounds, and before you knew it, she was employing different women, girls, and I love how they looked at it as like a production, like an assembly line, even before even before Henry Ford came about. Talk about how she really turned this into an amazing business.
Sure. So she employed young girls, friends, family members from Worcester, and they worked out of her home, and they would set up, like you say, like an assembly line. So each girl was in a row, and someone would be, let's say, putting one of these little tiny pieces on, and the next person would put the next piece on, so that the Valentine was assembled down this assembly line. It wasn't one person doing all of the work, it was all shared. And it was much faster that way. And so they were able to make more Valentines and sell more Valentines and grow this amazing business.
Now, historians love to point out that this woman, basically you could call her the mother of the Valentine's Day cards. She herself, though, was never married and never had a family, yet she must have still had that soft spot for romance in her heart. But it seems even if she didn't have a family, this kind of became her family.
I think it did. It did. She had brothers and sisters, but she developed this as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur, and did an amazing job building up this company. And by the time she eventually sold it, by the time she sold it, it was making about $100,000 a year. And she sold it in 1881. So that's, if you can imagine, that's a good amount of money today for a small business owner. And certainly in the 1880s, that would have been a very good, a good amount of money too.
Talk about the transformation of the Valentine's Day cards as we get further along. This one over here in the back is much more recent, especially compared to the ones up front. Right. But it's almost as if they still have some of the same I guess she kind of put that lace touch, that very romantic touch to the Valentine's Day card, and it seems to have continued.
Right, so we have other Valentines in our collection, not just Esther Howland's. Other people have donated Valentines over the years. And this one, let me just pull it up here. This one is from the 1960s, actually. And it has a lot in common in some ways with the Esther Howland one. But as you were saying, there's some details that are a bit different. So it's printed lace instead of original kind of hand-cut lace there. But it's still a very pretty Valentine with the cupids and the flowers. And it has this little paper pop-up as well there. So it's very elaborate, but would have been less time-consuming, less expensive, I imagine, to make than these ones.
So people must be surprised to know that Western Mass has a very romantic soft spot in the books of history. But that's incredible. And I guess if you had to say, I wouldn't say that she was probably the most significant woman to come from Mount Holyoke, but what kind of impact do you think that this one woman from Mount Holyoke, well, back then it was called Mount Holyoke Female Seminary, what kind of impact did she have on the world we have now? Because the Valentine's Day card industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. This is huge.
Well, I think she's very much a role model, the sense of being a female business owner. When you think of her in the late 1840s to the 1880s and what it would have been like to be a woman owning this business on her own at that time period. And that's something, it's part of our history to look back and to take great pride from and to see it as a great example for what women can do today as well.
Almost that's like an example beyond the romance and the frills and the thrills of a Valentine's Day. It kind of sets a good example for females nowadays.
It does. I think it does.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Leslie.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.